A different feel to Austria, it being a sprint weekend, the third of the year. That was one thing, but on the other side of the coin, not a lot of difference. Still unbelievably close. Let's have a look at the quickest laps in SQ3, sprint qualifying 3, as they line up for the grid tomorrow for the sprint race. Max Verstappen on the pole, Lando Norris second in the McLaren-Mercedes, Oscar Piastri going very well. Good to see that in the other McLaren-Mercedes. And then George Russell, the quicker of the two, factory Mercedes, sandwiching Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. So let's have a look at the laps in detail. Max did a 4.6, Lando a 4.7. I've rounded it up to a tenth basically. Oscar a 4.9, 5.1, 5.2. Close, as I say. And now we get down to the details. Through the speed trap on those specific laps when they recorded those times that defined the grid, Max 3.18. Nobody quicker through the speed trap today than the Red Bull. As quick as the Mercedes, but nobody quicker on this occasion. And then Sector 1, 16.3, Lando Norris 16.3. Sector 2, Max 28.9, Lando Norris 28.9. Sector 3, Max 19.4, Norris 19.4. But of course that doesn't tell the whole story, because through Sector 1, if you take it up to 1,000th of a second, Max was quicker by 0.06, which is quite a significant amount. And I think, as I said in the live stream yesterday, to me there are only two parts of this Red Bull lap where a driver of Max's quality, and we have to include other great drivers here, but let's just talk about Max on this occasion because he's the guy on the pole. A driver of Max's quality is able to get any sort of advantage from his touch and feel. And I said one of those would be going into turn 1, where potentially he's going to get his rotation absolutely perfect and he's going to have a nice acceleration run out of 1, mainly because of the homework he does going into the corner. And the other place I said would be the change of direction coming out of the long left-hander towards the end of the lap as they're going through that left-hander, and then they change direction going to the right. They're on the curb there, but there is a moment, of course, when the load has to go from one side to the other. And I predicted that Max would be unbelievably good there in managing the rate of that load change. And I think that's where he did actually get the pole over Lando Norris, because let's have a look at it. He was 0.060 quicker than Lando through Sector 1. And I think that is just getting into the corner slightly earlier, slightly shorter corner, and then getting the benefit of that mid-corner rotation, a slightly straighter exit with slightly less load on the left rear of the car, which allows him to have a little bit more acceleration going up into turn 2. Sector 2, which is basically top speed and then braking into the right-hander and then that infield section. Not a lot a guy like Max Verstappen's going to be able to do, because you're pretty much line locked into what you can do due to the cambers of the road, the shape of the road. You can gain a little bit perhaps going into the downhill right-hander, but not as much as you would on other circuits. So no surprise there actually to see Lando Norris slightly quicker, 0.019 on his quickest lap compared with Max Verstappen's. And that may also be Max coming out of the tyres slightly, allowing them to breathe in Sector 2, knowing that it was all important, this Sector 3, which of course it was always going to be. And through Sector 3, Max was quicker by 0.052 compared with Lando Norris, and that is quite a lot around that sector, I think, and it's really impressive. Not quite as big an advantage as he had through Sector 1, because that was rewarded by a longish straight, but he still had that long straight after the change of direction down the hill, and that's also where Max was really, really quick on his microsectors, purple all the way. And so it all added up to basically the same lap time, but Max just slightly better through sectors 1 and 3, those two important corners, turn 1 and then that change of direction. And Lando slightly quicker in Sector 2. It also adds up to the McLaren-Mercedes being a really, really quick car and almost as quick as a Red Bull RB20 around a circuit like the Red Bull Ring, which is very impressive when you consider how good the McLaren has been effectively since Miami, if not before. So really, really good lap by Max, just using all the talent that he has perfectly in the only places where you can use it, around the Red Bull Ring, in my opinion. So Lando P2, Oscar Piastri, let's look at his times, 4.9 in terms of the lap, so he's 0.2 away. Same top speed, 3.16, slightly slower than the Red Bull. McLaren obviously carrying a lot of downforce here, and that's hurting them a little bit in a straight line. 16.3 through Sector 1, basically the same. 29.0, fraction slower than Lando through Sector 2, where Lando obviously was really good, and then slightly slower through Sector 3 as well, but not much in it at all. Now we go to George Russell in the Mercedes, who didn't have a particularly good morning session. Lewis actually was quickest in the morning for a long time, but didn't run the soft tyre. We'll get onto that in a minute. George had a few issues. I think one of them was a brake issue. 5.0, just a shade slower than the two McLarens and the slower of the two McLarens. 3.17, a little bit quicker in a straight line though. So that's an interesting thing for Mercedes to take into the race in terms of their battling with McLaren. 16.4 Sector 1, yeah, a little bit away. 29.0, same as Oscar Sector 2, and 19.6 in Sector 3. All adds up to a car that doesn't have quite the same grip level as the McLaren, and certainly not the same grip level as the Red Bull, as driven by Max Verstappen. Now the interesting one, Carlos Sainz. Charles Leclerc didn't do a lap in SQ3, or he was out there, but he had some problem with the anti-stall. The engine stalled as he came out of the garage. He stopped at the end of the pit lane, had to go reboot the entire system. By the time he got out and was just about to begin his quickest lap, the checkered flag was out, so he didn't get in a quick lap, so he'll be starting P10. But a relatively good day for Carlos Sainz. 5.1, just slower than George Russell. 3.16, shade slower in a straight line. Ferrari there or thereabouts in terms of top speed. Perhaps a little bit too quick. I think they'd still prefer to have a bit more downforce than they've got. 16.4 in Sector 1. 28.9, very good Sector 2. 19.6 Sector 3. So look at George Russell's sector times and you see Carlos Sainz being right with him. Of course, we don't know what their tyre deg may or may not be like going into, certainly for the Grand Prix, going even to the sprint tomorrow. But so far, not bad for Carlos Sainz. And also bearing in mind the situation in which he finds himself in terms of his career. He looked really sharp in Austria, I thought, on Friday, right up there with Charles. Lewis Hamilton, 5.2, fraction slower. Now, he did have Carlos Sainz in front of him towards the end of his lap, so that would be one of the reasons he wasn't quite as quick as George, because he's looked as good as George all weekend. 5.2, 3.18 in a straight line. That would have been being in the toe of Carlos Sainz. 16, say toe, it was a little bit of a benefit, not a massive thing. 16.4 Sector 1, 29.0, 19.5. Pretty impressive last sector by Lewis. So Mercedes almost there with McLaren almost there with Red Bull, but bear in mind this is a very, very short lap and there are a lot of corners where it neutralizes cars, in my opinion, and so the fact that those three cars are so closely matched doesn't actually add up to a true picture of where we are in terms of the performance of the cars. It's just the characteristic of this Red Bull ring. Let's have a look now at Mercedes, because they were, by some standards, a little bit disappointing compared with where they'd been in the morning. These were the soft tyre or the fastest laps recorded in free practice this morning. Max Verstappen did a 5.6. This is on a soft tyre, all on the soft tyre, except Lewis Hamilton. Oscar Piastri 5.9, Charles Leclerc 6.0, Carlos Sainz 6.1, Lewis Hamilton 6.2 on the hard tyre, which is a very impressive lap. And you would think, okay, Max is doing 5.6 on a soft tyre, very short run, just one run before he did a bit of a fuel run. Lewis 6.2 on the hard tyre. You think, wow, that's really good. But the problem, in my opinion, was that Mercedes then kept Lewis on the hard tyre throughout the session. Now, bearing in mind qualifying for the sprint race requires the mediums to be used in SQ1 and SQ2 and then soft tyre in SQ3, you would imagine that they would run at least one set of mediums or maybe even a set of softs just to get a feel for the car on those compounds. But they didn't. I mean, that's what Max ran throughout that unofficial session on Friday. He ran the medium tyre, did one run on the soft tyre, which was his quickest lap. Then he went back to mediums, did a bit of a fuel run. Everything was medium soft, because that's what he was going to be using in qualifying. Mercedes, oddly, only ran the hard tyre on Lewis Hamilton's car, and George Russell ran the soft tyre for about 2 laps, but it looked like it was like a scrubbing in lap or something. He didn't do a quick lap on the soft tyre at all. So both George and Lewis only did quick laps on the hard tyre and then went out and did fuel runs. Now, all credit to some extent for Lewis with the fuel run, but we're talking about qualifying, setting the car up for qualifying for the sprint race. Look at the length of Lewis Hamilton's long run in Friday untimed practice in Austria. You got Max focusing on getting the car right for sprint qualifying, doing 3 laps with fuel in the car. You got Lando doing 5 laps. You got Charles Leclerc doing 6 laps or 5 laps, whatever it is. And you got Lewis Hamilton doing 22 laps. I've taken some out. Some of them are in the 10s. I've taken those out because it was just a traffic thing. Okay, on the one side of the coin, you say, well, that's really impressive. Look how consistent Lewis was, and look at the homework Mercedes are doing. And wow. But on the other hand, you'd say, why on a circuit that's so short and so perfunctory in so many ways, do Mercedes need so much information from their long run that Red Bull only need 3 laps for and McLaren only need 5 laps for? It was just a bizarre thing. And Lewis, therefore, didn't get the feel of the medium or the soft at all going into sprint qualifying. Now, I presume that's something that's talked about with the drivers, and I presume Lewis was completely comfortable with that. You would imagine that would be the case, communication obviously being a critical thing these days, but it's still an odd decision in my opinion, bearing in mind how quickly sprint qualifying is over. They basically have time for one run, blink and you miss it in each sector, each Q sector that is. And there were Mercedes just going in blind, if you like, and Lewis's first run, actually in SQ1, he did 2, I say first run, yeah, 2, first run, exactly. He was really slow and not happy with the feel of the car at all. Then he just scraped into SQ2, and then I think he could have been pretty good, actually, but he just, wasn't quite there, and then he got the Carlos Sainz thing. Sergio Perez qualified 7th for Red Bull, slightly better, but still a long way, half a second off the Max Verstappen pace around a short lap, so he's still got a long way to go before he's in any way where he should be in that car. Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, again, getting both Alpines into the top 10. This is sprint qualifying, don't forget, not the actual Grand Prix. And Charles Leclerc, 10th. Kevin Magnussen was good, 11th in the Haas Ferrari, upstaging a lot of other midfield runners. Lance Stroll, quicker than Fernando Alonso, just similarly. Aston Martin's again way off the pace, very disappointing. Yuki Tsunoda 14th, and Logan Sargent made it through to SQ2, whereas Alex Albon didn't. Nice thing for Logan Sargent at a moment when in his career when he's thinking, who am I going to be driving for in F1, if anyone, next year. So he's scoring a few points there, I think, credit points that is. Alex Albon not slow and not getting into SQ2. So good job by Logan Sargent. Daniel Ricciardo didn't get out of SQ1, nor did Nico Hülkenberg or the 2 stake Saubers. So not a lot of difference, not a lot of change. You keep reading these press releases, particularly from Sauber, saying, oh, we hope the next circuit's going to suit us more and more upgrades, but they seem to be stagnating where they are. At the front, though, despite all the talk about McLaren and Mercedes and the inconsistencies at Ferrari and potentially getting another good circuit for them, it was still Max Verstappen that did the job perfectly. He even had a slight glitch this morning when he stopped on the pit straight and they put the red flag out and he was reversed back into the pit lane and rebooted the car. On the radio, Max said all he did was just make one click for a change to the high-speed differential, and the whole thing stopped. So the differential, the active diff, strikes again. Now I'm only joking, but a friend of mine designed it. But they got it all going, and within a few minutes, Max was straight out again, and it was just after that he did that quick lap. So despite that glitch, Red Bull right there, looking like a really good race team, as they always are. So an interesting day, I think, mainly for the very subtle differences between the lap of Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Max superb into 1, and then as a result benefiting slightly from the run between 1 and 2, and then that change of direction between turn 7, which is the end of the left-hander, and turn 8, which is a quick part of the circuit, and nonetheless he's getting that change of direction absolutely perfect in terms of the weight transfer of the car. Just a tiny subtle difference, and we saw some very nice slow-mos of him from the rear executing that absolutely perfectly. So yeah, and whereas Lando's just making it slightly longer in everything he does. Very little difference, but a subtle difference, and enough to make a few thousandths of a second difference on those sectors. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to TrackNinja for their support of this channel, and a big thanks to you for watching. See you tomorrow.